Hey guys, it's Seeney here, and today I have some tips for videographers that are looking to get into photography. So yesterday you may have seen that I did some tips for photographers that were looking to get into videography, and today we're doing the opposite. So just like videography, photography has its own unique little quirks that you need to learn about that are slightly different from video and vice versa. Someone may be able to do really great video, but those skills may not quite transfer over to photography, and of course the other way as well. So it's important to learn as much as you can about both fields and how they're the same and how they're different. Alright, so the first tip to getting great photos is to take way more photos than you think you'll need. Now the reason for this is that it all comes down to law of averages. You might take 10 really bad photos and then take one good one. You might take another 10 bad photos and then you get a really good one. So the more that you take, the more you're going to have to choose from when you get to editing them. So photography is all about choices. You want different angles to choose from, you want different perspectives, and that will lead you to getting some really interesting and awesome shots. Okay, so tip 2. Now this is where it differs a little bit from video. It's really important to try and get the colors as close as you possibly can in camera. Now anyone that shoots a lot of video will know that generally people shoot in a log format where the colors are really flat. Now the reason that this is done is because it allows for a lot more flexibility in post-production when you're trying to set a mood to do with the coloring. However, with photos, trying to get it as close as possible in camera is going to yield the best results color-wise. Because if the colors are there, it's really easy to enhance them. Now it's a good idea to be shooting on a flat picture profile or a vivid one or a natural one, something like that that brings out the colors a little bit more than a log profile, because what that does is it allows you to accentuate those colors that are already there. And what that's going to do is create a really vibrant and rich photo. Now something that is possible in video, but it's a little bit more specific to photographers, is to be able to shoot your pictures raw. Now raw is a format where it captures just basically all of the data that comes through the sensor. Now when you're shooting raw, this creates very, very big files, which is why you can't generally do it for video on DSLR unless you have a very, very expensive camera. However, when you're taking photos, it's much easier to work in the raw format. Now basically the difference between RAW and JPEG files is that the RAW photos, you can change your white balance after you take the photo. So you can take it back to the computer and then you can mess around with the white balance. However, if you're shooting with a JPEG, your white balance is baked into the camera. Now this is really, really helpful because if you make a mistake in the field, it's not going to be the end of the world. For example, if you're shooting on video and you're just shooting in a MOV format, then your white balance is baked in. You're stuck with where you set that. However, when you're shooting raw for photos, you can change that in the computer, and that just allows you so much more room and margin for error in case you make a mistake. Now the next tip I have is to familiarize yourself with the different shooting modes that you can have when you're taking photos. When you're shooting video, you basically have 3 things: normal motion, slow motion, and fast motion. But when you're shooting photos, there's a few more modes that you can use to get your shots. One of the modes that you could use on your camera, for example, if you're shooting sports or something that's really fast moving and you just want to get the action right at the right time, is to use the burst mode on your camera, which will take 5, 10, 15 pictures in that second, which are really high quality pictures. I found that this is the absolute best mode for shooting any kind of sports, extreme sports, or physical activity. But let's say you want to get a nice picture of the night sky. You don't want to be taking lots of pictures every second because you're not going to be letting any light into the camera. So your exposure time needs to be very long to let the light into the camera. And that means you need to hold the camera very, very still. So when you press the button when your camera's on a tripod, there is a very, very subtle movement of the camera. It just happens from when you press the button. But what you can do is set up a timer so that the exposure begins 2 seconds after you press the button, and that will give the camera time to not shake. And that is going to yield a much better result, especially when your exposure is open for a very long time. Because it only takes a very small amount of movement to ruin the exposure of a photo. Something else which is a bit more exclusive to photography is HDR photos. Now that is a high dynamic range photo. So with video, you just shoot the one image 25 times every second or 24 times a second depending on your frame rate, and you're stuck with that dynamic range. But something that's really interesting with a lot of the modern cameras these days is HDR photography, and what that is the camera taking 3, 5, 7 photos all in a very close time frame together. So some of these photos will be overexposed and some will be underexposed and some will be right in the middle. Now, taking a photo that's overexposed will give you lots of the detail that is in the darkness of that photo, and vice versa. If you're taking a photo that's underexposed, you're going to get a lot of detail in the highlights because you can see everything that's going on there when it's bright. So what you can do with these 3, 5, 7 photos is you can take them and have them blended together in a program like Photoshop. And what that will do is create this photo that has an incredible dynamic range. You'll be able to see every single little detail that's really light, that's really dark, all blended together in the one photo. So I have a couple of examples of high dynamic range photography. It's some of my favorite type of photography because it allows you to have so much rich depth in color and detail. So next tip is composition. Just like video, composition is really important. However, you have one image to try and tell a story as opposed to a lot. So it's really important that you nail the composition of the photos. So there's a few tips for videographers that are looking to up their photo game. I hope you found some of these tips useful. My name is Seeney. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you later.